So we're jumping in. We're talking about weddings and marriage and one more thing today. So let's take a look. Have you ever thought about all the facts and figures of weddings? So you can take a second, you can pause me, make your guesses. If you Google them, you're going to find all the answers. So just take a guess and I'll go through them quickly. So the number of couples who got married in 2023, over 2 million. The percentages of weddings that are destination weddings, which means like you go get married in the Bahamas or Hawaii or something, 19%. Average wedding budget, $30,000, but that's actually like the nationwide average, and I think it's like 46,000 or something here in Southern California. The average cost of a wedding dress is $2,000. The average age of bride and groom is interesting. So the average age of somebody who's feminine getting married and masculine, identifying as masculine getting married, it went up and up and up, and then it started to come back down, and now it's going back up again. So bride, it's 28.4, and groom, it's 30.2. Average number of guests, 115. Average number of bridesmaids, 3 to 6. The percentage of weddings with a photo booth, like what, 3 out of 4 basically have a photo booth. The most popular month to get engaged, December. Think about all those commercials that you see, like how somebody's giving somebody a puppy with a ring tied around its neck under the tree, or they're ice skating, or, the kiss begins with K. They're selling us hard on that. Okay. And then lastly, because it's so expensive, the average cost of a diamond ring, $5,200. So there you go, some wedding facts and figures. Now, depending on like your socialization as a child, your, gender identity, somebody who identifies as feminine oftentimes kind of grows up like, one day I'll be a bride. It's kind of like you're the princess for the day. And you don't necessarily always grow up, like maybe you start dreaming of like a wedding one day, but you don't necessarily always, as a like child growing up, think about the observations of what marriages you see in your life and the impact they kind of have on you for like, there you go, for better or for worse. There you go, there's my wedding pun. I have been, I'm, I, I won't cry. I'm really, really, really lucky to have been married for 25 years as of this past summer to somebody like I'm basically still obsessed with him. It's a whole thing. But Sean and I met in college and got married really young. We got married, I'm 16 months older than he is, and we managed to get married in the whatever 4 months of the year that I'm 2 years older than him. So I was 23 and he was 21. He turned 22 later that month, but because that makes a big difference. But I wonder if you've ever gotten a chance to ask the people in your life, assuming that they are there, that have had kind of long-term marriages, because I guess technically he and I are on our way to one. But that kind of cliche question, like, what's the secret, right? I got the chance to ask once. My grandma lived a long, healthy life until age 92. And when she passed away, we were back in Chicago at her funeral, and we got to spend some time with her, I think, youngest brother. She was one of 8. And so Uncle Ted and his wife, Aunt Lorraine, they'd been married for 63 years. And so I asked that question, what's the secret? And without hesitation, they answered, we argue every day. And so my Sean, dear sweet, foolish Sean, my husband, thinks he has the answer. And he's like, so you both win? And my Uncle Ted just looked at Sean, winked at him, and pointed at Aunt Lorraine. But I would really encourage you, because that's going to be one of my favorite moments in life. I would really encourage you, even though it's a cliche question that sometimes gets, the same answers, don't get to go to bed angry, that type of stuff. If you have a couple that you can ask, or even if you don't ask, take a minute and think about who in your life, whether they've been married for 5 minutes or 50 years, that you're like, even just a long term relationship, that you're like, I really admire that relationship. And think to yourself, what have I observed that I think makes the difference? So there you go. You got some pictures of a wedding from 1999, and we're going to move on to other aspects of marriage. So I want to share the 7 aspects of a successful marriage with you, and then I have actually 7 more little things, but I'm not going to go through the other 7. We're just going to go through these kind of one at a time. So the first aspect of a successful marriage is that you're best friends, which I think is totally cheesy. Like, oh, Sean's my best friend. But think about for a second, describe a best friend, like somebody who you have laugh together all the time. They're loyal, they're trustworthy, they know all your stories, like you have a history with them, you love being with them, they make you feel better. So I can be all like, best friends. But yeah, technically, you really do want your partner to be your very best friend, and you're very lucky if they are. You like each other as a person, which I know sometimes you see like couples, even though this seems pretty basic, right? But you're like, do you? So you like each other as a person. You believe that marriage is a long-term sacred commitment. My parents separated when I was 3 years old. My dad had a massive problem with infidelity, and I'm very, very lucky that in a world where my mom was, deeply hurt by that, that she really focused on the fact that they had kids together. And the two of them, I have to give them a great deal of credit, have always maintained a really strong co-parenting relationship. Like I really benefited from the fact that I never had to be a person who was worried, like, oh, my mom and dad are going to be in the same place. And I know that is not a gift that everybody gets in life when they have parents that aren't together. And so I take that, like, I'm very, very grateful for that. But I also didn't grow up with an example of like a marriage, right? And so Sean and I will argue because we that's what everybody does at times. And I gotta say, I'm so grateful that now, 25 years in, we've kind of grown up to a point that if we start to argue, because there have been many in the past, that we just within like 20 minutes, if even, one of us is like, I don't want to fight. And we're like, I don't want to either. But we used to argue a fair amount, I gotta admit. Or at least when we did, we'd really go for it and really get stubborn, and it was really not awesome. And so I have to admit that every once in a while, I'm not proud of this, I'm actually deeply ashamed, but I want to share it. I would be like, we should just get divorced. Which sounds like no. He'd save me from being kind of that. I didn't want to, but I mean, I didn't want to even fight. That's the funny thing. All those arguments we had all those years, now we're like, yeah, we no, not even nobody wanted to fight, but we just kind of foolishness. Sean believed that marriage was a long-term sacred commitment, and ultimately by him kind of seeing me through, like basically growing up together and getting to the point where he made me believe that marriage is a long-term sacred commitment, and I'm very lucky for it. You think your spouse has grown more interesting. You know what? I would have skipped over this one and not thought it was deeply important until I saw it happen. Sean's parents were married they had Sean when they were 18 and 19. They had his brother Kyle a few years later. And that means Kyle went off to college in Iowa and Sean came from Oregon, right? Town to college in California. And that meant by the time they were, barely 40, their kids were moved out of the state on their way. And so my in-laws, Randy and Ellie, had very different ideas of kind of the next years. Ellie wanted to finally go on some trips, and she wanted to come down here to see us and out to Iowa to see Kyle and his wife and spend time with friends, and just, they'd been raising kids all these years. And my father-in-law, he definitely would want to come see us and go out to Iowa to see Kyle. But he's kind of the type of guy, he worked at the bank, he came home, he really watched his shows in his recliner, would putz around his garage, that type of stuff. Didn't want to socialize as much as Ellie. And ultimately that was one of the things that broke up their 33-year marriage. And so I really do want to touch on that and share that anecdote because, like I said, I would have skipped over this being like, oh yeah, I guess that's important. But I saw that no, it can be really, really important. You agree on aims and goals, which are the big things in life, and trying to figure out a way to come into agreement if you have differences in that early on. And that's one of those things to be in communication about as you are really getting into a serious relationship. If I could wish one thing for all of you, it's that you could just find somebody that you can laugh your ass off. Especially like if something happens and you're totally embarrassed and just utterly mortified with them, but you can just laugh and laugh hysterically. Like if I could wish that kind of joy to all of you, I am wishing all that joy. And then finally, kind of like the like each other as a person, you want the relationship to succeed. But that can be really, really important. It kind of goes in hand with believing marriage is a long-term sacred commitment. So, like I said, now I have 7 more things to share, but I'm not going to go through all 7 of them. I'll put them in the module if you want to take a look at this. But John Gottman is a psychologist who's famous for predicting divorce. And we'll look at that in actually just a minute. We just barely got married in this lecture, and now we're going to talk about divorce already. We're kind of packing it in here today. But I just want to bring attention to a few of his principles. This is something written by he and his wife, Julie. They're a little cheesy too, not gonna lie. If I can't handle like best friends, enhance your love map. Really, just I'm like, oh my gosh. But there's a lot of great advice in here. Um, Solve your solvable problems. Number five, the fact that, and I think it's how many of us it doesn't occur to us. The way that you start a difficult conversation or the way that you start, I guess, an argument is likely going to be the way it finishes. So if you jump into being instantaneously angry and mean, it's probably not going to go well. And he explains that there. The other one I want to touch on briefly is number seven, create shared meaning. Some of us have been lucky enough to grow up in families because not everybody gets the chance to be, and I always want to acknowledge that. Not everybody, we kind of assume as a society that everybody has this happy, intact family, and that's not necessarily always the case. But some people, even with friends and stuff like that, you have like those little traditions that you make up. Like I'm convinced with one group of friends and I, we invented Friendsgiving. If anybody else is having a Friendsgiving, it's because of us. But thinking about the fact that, and I don't think we think of relationships this way always, or families this way. If there's something that your family did, like a pancake breakfast every Sunday, or the ways that you celebrated the holidays that you want to carry on, well, not only can you carry those on, you can make up your own, right? Have you ever thought about that? And so, things that Sean and I have done over the years, when we were first deciding our very first Christmas that we were married, we're like, when are we going to open gifts from each other? And we decided the very, very, very last thing on Sunday, or not Sunday night, on Christmas night, December 25th, like 9:45, 10:15 p.m. We've already like cleaned up the whole kitchen because we've probably hosted Christmas dinner. Like it's Christmas is over. But the very last thing we're gonna do is we open our gifts to each other and we write silly little things on the tags. And we love that tradition, especially because I'm the type of person who gets sad when Christmas is over. So like I have that last little thing Christmas night to look forward to. Or even just now, 25 years in, we're both teachers. We both, to honestly, if you even remotely ever thought that I am a decent teacher, it's a ton of work to make happen. And Sean works really, really hard to be a good teacher too. And so that means we're working every night, we're working every weekend, like we're working. And so we started a new tradition just the beginning of the school year, take a break Thursday. Totally cheesy. We labeled it. You can judge me. I don't care. But like every Thursday night, it's actually in honor of the fact that back in college, like Thursday nights were always the parties at his fraternity house. And so now our version of a party is eating like graham crackers and watching something on Netflix for like an hour. But it's like a tradition that we even, at any point. And I want you to kind of think about the ways that we can possibly create those silly traditions and celebrate life and what they can do to help support a relationship. Okay, like I told you, Gottman's famous for predicting, if he watches like a couple argue, predicting if they are going to get divorced. And there are four ways that he does it. He calls them the four horsemen of the apocalypse, right? So it's kind of like the end of the world. And I don't have any imagery for the four horsemen, but I give you the four giraffe of the apocalypse. And so let's go through his four horsemen. The first one is criticism. So that is not when you're complaining and oh, whining, right? I'm very good at that. But when you're like, why did you do this? Like you're kind of jumping immediately to criticizing and not being kind-hearted. The next is contempt. You cannot like this person like they breathe wrong. Like you just can't stand them. Next is defensiveness. And I think we probably all know somebody in our lives maybe that's a little like I didn't do that, that's not what I meant, like that kind of defensiveness that it gets kind of exhausting to I don't know, I mean it's constantly they won't admit where they might you know be willing to say I didn't do this right. They won't have the humility. And then finally, stonewalling. Stonewalling is actually when, and Sean and I have struggled with stonewalling over the years significantly. Those arguments that I mentioned early that would be about silly stuff, ultimately. I mean, not silly, but, minor things that we would blow up into major things. But I don't know if it has maybe occurred to you as you've listened to me ramble in these lectures. I talk really fast. And if you get me upset, I'm going to go, it's not going to stop. And Sean is not that way. He's a little bit more measured and not as quick to have like, you know, an hour-long monologue. And so he would be like, I'm not going to talk to you. And that wouldn't go real well because I'm like, oh, you're not going to talk to me? No, you're going to talk to me even more. And he's like, well, no, I'm going to go, do the dishes. I'm not going to talk to you. And I'm like, but I'm now going to stand at the kitchen sink and you're going to talk. It was just a whole issue. And so ultimately what we discovered is, yeah, you know what? If I start going and I'm like, blah, 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 and he needs to take a minute and think about it and maybe calm down or whatever it is. But I'm going to be even more hurt if he's like, I'm not going to talk to you. So what we ultimately decided is in these moments, he's going to say, you know what? We got a problem here. I want to fix it. I need to go calm down. I'm going to take 15 minutes. I'm going to take an hour. I'm going to go run this errand. I'm going to do whatever it is. And we're going to come back and fix it. So that I've kind of gotten the reassurance that like a solution is on its way, that we both are invested in care, but like I'm not going to follow him around being like, but, that type of stuff. So stonewalling is kind of when you shut somebody out. Gottman says out of these four things, one of them is the number one predictor of divorce. Which one do you think it is? It's contempt. Because come on, if you can't stand someone, oof. So it's amazing. John Gottman has made himself, well known as a psychologist for like a 90, 91%, I don't even know, accuracy rate. But if you saw a couple doing all these, you'd be like, uh-oh. But also, I want to end with this. Take a look at this list again. Do you ever catch yourself criticizing? Do you ever catch yourself being defensive? So I don't want to act like, oh, the other person, but think about where we might bear responsibility and where we can be the best version of ourselves in a relationship.